Ethan Harper had always been the quiet observer in every room he entered. He wasn't shy in the traditional sense, but he preferred to measure people first, to understand them before committing to the kind of familiarity that most considered friendship. His 23 years had been punctuated by routine, early morning jogs, late-night online conversations, and weekends spent in the muted company of his thoughts. He liked it that way, predictable yet safe. But tonight, as he lounged on his apartment balcony watching the city lights blur under the faint drizzle, there was an itch of anticipation he couldn't quite name. The invitation had come unexpectedly. His maternal uncle, Ryan Harper, had asked him to drop by a small family gathering. Nothing fancy, just a few neighbors and close friends. Ethan almost declined, citing an early morning the next day, but something in Ryan's tone made him pause, a warmth, an insistence that made saying no impossible. He had always admired his uncle for that balance, firm yet encouraging, cautious yet willing to push boundaries when it mattered. When he arrived at Ryan's townhouse, laughter spilled from the living room, warm and inviting. Ethan's eyes immediately caught a new face among the familiar ones. Caleb Morgan stood near the fireplace, his posture casual but commanding, an effortless charm radiating in the way he tilted his head as he listened to someone speak. Ethan felt a jolt of awareness, an uncomfortable but electric recognition that this person, this friend of his uncle's, was somehow different from everyone else. Caleb noticed Ethan almost immediately, offering a brief, polite smile that lingered just a fraction too long for it to feel ordinary. There was a spark of something unspoken in his gaze, subtle yet undeniable. It made Ethan acutely aware of the rest of the room fading into a blur, his focus narrowing to this one presence. He felt a strange mix of curiosity and hesitation, an internal tug-of-war he couldn't quite rationalize. Ryan, ever perceptive, guided Ethan toward Caleb. "Ethan, this is Caleb. Caleb, meet my nephew, Ethan." The handshake was firm, measured, and lingered just long enough to make Ethan aware of the warmth of Caleb's hand, the understated confidence in the grip. Caleb's voice, when he spoke, was smooth, friendly, and slightly teasing, as if he already knew something private that Ethan had yet to discover about himself. The conversation started lightly, weather, recent neighborhood events, Ryan's usual anecdotes, but there was an undercurrent, subtle and hypnotic. Caleb asked questions that seemed casual but struck deeper than their surface. He noticed Ethan's choice of words, the slight hesitation before he answered, and responded in kind, weaving humor and curiosity in a way that made Ethan feel both seen and slightly vulnerable. It was unsettling in the best possible way. By the time dessert arrived, Ethan found himself sitting closer to Caleb than the situation technically required. He laughed more freely than he had expected, and each glance exchanged seemed to carry more weight than the words spoken. There was no overt flirtation, nothing inappropriate for a family gathering, yet the energy between them hummed with a tension Ethan hadn't anticipated. He caught himself wondering, briefly, almost shamefully, what it would feel like to have this person as his own friend, beyond the confines of familial connection. Caleb excused himself for a moment, and Ethan watched as he moved through the room, effortless and poised, interacting with others in a way that drew them in yet never overwhelmed. There was a quiet magnetism to him, a sense that he lived comfortably on the boundary between charm and enigma. Ethan's mind replayed the first handshake, the subtle nuances of tone, the ease with which Caleb seemed to read him. He realized that he wanted to know Caleb in a way that went beyond casual acquaintance, an admission that both thrilled and terrified him. After the gathering began to wind down, Ryan clapped Ethan lightly on the shoulder. "Don't be shy, kid. Caleb's heading to a coffee shop nearby tomorrow afternoon. Why don't you drop by? You two might get along." The suggestion was casual, almost offhand, but Ethan felt a pulse of excitement he hadn't expected. He nodded, trying to mask the flutter in his chest, and mumbled something noncommittal. Inside, however, a plan was already forming. Back in his apartment, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about Caleb. He replayed the moments of conversation, the way Caleb had laughed at his jokes, the intensity behind certain glances. His fingers itched for a phone, for a message to bridge the gap between fleeting acquaintance and potential friendship. And so, he sent a brief, cautious text, a simple, friendly greeting that hinted at curiosity without revealing too much. Caleb responded almost instantly. "Hey, Ethan. Great meeting you tonight. Coffee sounds good, how about tomorrow afternoon?" The efficiency of the reply, combined with the subtle warmth behind it, made Ethan grin despite himself. He typed back a time, paused, deleted, and retyped. He felt a thrill, a pulse of anticipation that made him hyper-aware of the empty apartment around him, the muted hum of the city, and the soft glow of streetlights through the window. Lying on his bed later, Ethan reflected on the evening. There was something about Caleb that made the world feel simultaneously larger and smaller, larger in the possibilities of connection, smaller in the way everything else seemed to fade into the background when he thought of him. It was unnerving and exhilarating, the kind of feeling that came rarely and demanded attention. By the time he drifted off to sleep, Ethan had made an unspoken decision. He would pursue this friendship, carefully, cautiously, but pursue it nonetheless. The spark was there, undeniable, and he couldn't ignore it without betraying a part of himself that had been dormant for far too long. What this path would bring, clarity, chaos, or something in between, he could not yet know. But one thing was certain, his life had just shifted in a way that promised to change everything, and somewhere in the city, Caleb Morgan probably didn't know how much influence he had already begun to wield over Ethan Harper's thoughts, or how the simple act of a smile and a conversation could set the stage for a story neither of them had yet imagined. Ethan stayed still on the couch, his mind racing, heart pounding in a rhythm he couldn't quite control. Logan's breathing was slow and even, but the warmth radiating from his body created a tension that Ethan couldn't ignore. He told himself to step back, to respect the invisible line that had always defined their friendship, but every instinct in him fought against restraint. He had known Logan for years, yet this moment made him feel like a stranger, like he had stumbled into a world he had never been allowed to enter before. Logan shifted slightly in his sleep, murmuring something indistinct, and Ethan's ears perked up. The sound, soft and vulnerable, tugged at a protective impulse he hadn't expected to feel so intensely. He leaned forward slightly, just enough to catch the faintest expression of discomfort cross Logan's face. Ethan swallowed hard. There was a fragility here that had never been visible during their day-to-day interactions. This was Logan in a state stripped of pretense, unguarded and exposed in a way that made Ethan's chest tighten with something that was equal parts empathy and something unnameable. He took a measured breath, telling himself that he could just sit quietly and watch, that he didn't have to do anything more than be there if Logan needed him. But as the minutes passed, the quiet between them seemed to thicken, charged with the kind of energy that made ordinary spaces feel impossibly intimate. Ethan's thoughts drifted to their past, late-night conversations, shared confidences, laughter that had echoed through empty streets, moments where Logan had leaned on him emotionally without ever acknowledging the closeness that had grown between them. He realized, with a sharp pang, that the bond he had always defined as friendship had, in some unspoken way, been deeper all along. A soft rustle pulled Ethan's attention to Logan's movement. He had shifted onto his back now, eyes fluttering open just enough to register consciousness. "Ethan." Logan's voice was low, slightly hoarse, yet threaded with something unfamiliar. Confusion? Vulnerability? The subtle tremor in his tone made Ethan's pulse spike. You're still here." "Yeah," Ethan said, trying to sound casual, though his voice betrayed him. "I thought I should check on you." His words felt inadequate, and he knew it, but there was something in Logan's gaze that made him pause, something unspoken that hovered between them like a charged wire. Logan's eyes shifted, focusing on him with an intensity that made Ethan's stomach twist. "I wasn't expecting company," he admitted, his voice softer now, almost confessional. "Not like this." There was a pause, a hesitant inhale, and then Logan continued. I guess I just needed someone to be here. To be close, without having to explain." Ethan's mind reeled. The words were casual, almost nonchalant, but the vulnerability beneath them was unmistakable. He understood, on some level, that Logan was opening a door he had never opened before. And Ethan, despite every rational thought telling him to step back, felt compelled to remain near, to occupy the space Logan had offered, that he took a cautious step closer, keeping his distance yet closing enough to feel the subtle warmth that radiated from Logan's presence. "I'm here," he said simply, letting the words carry the weight they needed. Logan's eyes softened, and for a brief moment, the tension that had gripped the room seemed to ease, replaced by a quiet understanding. "I don't know why," Logan began, hesitated, and then shook his head. "It doesn't matter. You're here now. That's enough." Ethan felt the pull of his friend's unspoken invitation, an emotional gravity that demanded attention. He wanted to respond, to say something that could anchor the fragile space between them, but his thoughts were muddled, his instincts at odds with the boundary he had always respected. Instead, he simply sat down on the floor beside the couch, close but careful to avoid overstepping. They sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that wasn't empty but thick with meaning. Ethan could feel the tension coiling in his chest, a mix of anticipation, uncertainty, and desire that he couldn't quite untangle. He tried to focus on Logan's breathing, steady and deep, yet even that became a reminder of the intimacy of the moment. Logan finally moved again, turning slightly to face him, and Ethan caught a glimpse of something unguarded in his eyes. "Do you ever wonder about us?" Logan asked quietly. His question was tentative, almost a whisper, yet it carried a weight that made Ethan's heart hammer. "About what we mean to each other. About things we never say." Ethan hesitated, swallowing the lump in his throat. The truth was complicated, layered with memories, attraction, and the unacknowledged feelings they had both carefully avoided naming. "I think about it more than I should," he admitted, voice low, careful. "More than I probably have any right to." Logan's expression shifted, a mixture of relief and apprehension passing across his features. "You don't have to say anything," Logan murmured, turning his gaze downward. "I just wanted you to know that I trust you. I don't do that with anyone." Ethan's chest tightened again, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Trust. Vulnerability. Friendship and desire tangled together in ways that neither of them had fully confronted before tonight. They stayed like that, suspended in the fragile intimacy of the room, until a quiet knock at the door from the building's hallway reminded them that the outside world still existed. It was a subtle reminder that this bubble, this delicate moment, couldn't last forever. Logan's eyes met Ethan's again, and in that gaze was both invitation and caution, a silent acknowledgement of the tension they now shared. Ethan felt the pull of responsibility and the pull of curiosity, both demanding different actions. He knew that whatever happened next would define the boundaries, or perhaps the dissolution, of their relationship. He took a measured breath, letting the weight of the moment settle around him. For now, he would remain. He would navigate the fragile line between friendship and something uncharted, aware that each choice carried consequences he could neither predict nor fully control. And as Logan's gaze softened, and the tension in the room hummed like a low, persistent chord, Ethan realized that this night would change everything. It wasn't just a simple visit anymore, it was a doorway into something neither of them had named, and the next steps, small, deliberate, tentative, would determine what kind of bond they would ultimately share. Ethan remained on the floor, the soft carpet pressing against his knees, as the quiet hum of the apartment seemed to settle around them. Logan shifted slightly, glancing at him with a mixture of anticipation and caution. There was a tension that neither of them had named, a delicate line suspended between friendship and something deeper, something neither had allowed themselves to fully explore until tonight. The weight of unspoken words pressed heavily, and Ethan realized that there was no easy way to return to the simplicity of the past. Logan started, voice hesitant, "I don't want this to change everything." His words, careful and deliberate, hung in the air, yet they carried a vulnerability that Ethan had rarely seen. Logan's eyes met his, searching for reassurance, for understanding, for a signal that the bond they shared could survive this shift. Ethan swallowed, feeling the heaviness of responsibility settle in his chest. He had never thought of Logan in such a way before tonight, yet now, with the quiet intimacy surrounding them, the line between desire and friendship blurred. Ethan's mind raced, cataloging every memory, every laugh, every moment of closeness that had built over years of companionship. There was an honesty here, raw and unfiltered, that demanded acknowledgement. "I don't want things to change either," he said carefully, his voice low, deliberate. But I can't pretend that I don't feel what I feel. And neither can you. Logan's expression softened, a flicker of relief passing across his features. The moment was fragile, yet it carried a resonance neither had anticipated, the realization that their connection was undeniable, even if it came with risk. They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the faint creak of the floorboards and Logan's measured breathing. Ethan could feel the tension winding tighter, the anticipation pulling him forward, yet there was a hesitation rooted in both loyalty and fear. The apartment felt like its own world, removed from expectation and judgment, yet every instinct in Ethan screamed that the outside world, with its consequences, still waited. He knew that crossing this invisible boundary would alter everything, yet he could not bring himself to step back. Logan reached out then, slowly, tentatively, his fingers brushing Ethan's hand in a gesture both deliberate and hesitant. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. The simple touch carried more weight than any words could convey, trust, longing, the promise of connection tempered by caution. He met Logan's gaze, searching for clarity, for consent, for affirmation, and found it mirrored in the quiet confidence of his friend's expression. For a fleeting moment, time seemed suspended. "You're sure?" Ethan asked quietly, needing confirmation more for himself than for Logan. There was no judgment in Logan's eyes, only the soft reassurance that the choice was mutual, that neither was being coerced or pushed beyond comfort. Logan nodded, a small, deliberate motion, and Ethan felt the tension in his chest ease, replaced by a fragile sense of resolve. They moved closer, careful and measured, the air between them thick with unspoken emotion. Every glance, every subtle movement, was weighted with significance, a dance of restraint and desire that neither had rehearsed but both instinctively understood. Ethan felt the full impact of the intimacy, a connection that transcended physicality, rooted instead in years of trust, shared experiences, and the rare vulnerability that only the closest of friends allowed themselves to show. As the night deepened, the conversation between them became softer, more reflective. Logan shared thoughts he had never voiced to anyone, feelings of loneliness and longing, the quiet fear of being misunderstood. Ethan listened, offering words of comfort and affirmation, aware that the emotional landscape they navigated was far more significant than any physical closeness. The room was filled with the weight of their mutual acknowledgement, the realization that they were no longer simply friends, but something more complex, something undefined yet profoundly consequential. Yet even in this intimacy, there was caution. Ethan felt the delicate balance of desire and restraint, understanding that the choices made tonight carried consequences beyond the walls of the apartment. He thought of the years of friendship, of shared memories that now shimmered with a new layer of meaning, and wondered if the bond could survive the awakening of emotions that neither had fully recognized until this night. Logan shifted again, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think we can keep this, what we are?" The question, tentative and vulnerable, lingered between them. Ethan considered it carefully, weighing the trust, the desire, and the potential fallout. "I don't know," he admitted honestly. "But I do know that I don't want to lose what we have. And if we navigate this carefully, maybe we don't have to." There was a quiet hope in his words, a recognition that while the path ahead was uncertain, their connection was strong enough to survive exploration. They settled into a fragile rhythm, side by side on the couch, hands occasionally brushing, smiles shared in the dim glow of the room. The tension that had defined the evening gradually eased, replaced by a tentative warmth, an acknowledgement that while boundaries had shifted, respect and trust remained intact. Ethan felt a deep sense of relief, tempered by the awareness that the night had marked a turning point, a subtle yet undeniable shift in the nature of their relationship. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the curtains, painting the room in soft, muted tones, Ethan rose from the floor, careful not to disturb the fragile peace that had been established. Logan stirred slightly, eyes opening to meet his. There was a shared understanding in that gaze, a silent acknowledgement of the journey they had embarked upon, and of the trust that would be required to navigate the uncharted territory ahead. Ethan offered a small, reassuring smile. "I'll be around," he said softly. Logan's lips curved into a faint, relieved smile in return, the kind that carried gratitude, trust, and a hint of something more. It was enough for now, a promise without words, an understanding that the night's events had not broken their bond but had, instead, added depth and complexity to it, and with that, Ethan stepped back, allowing Logan a moment of solitude, even as he remained present in the space, aware that the decisions made tonight would echo far beyond the walls of the apartment. The future was uncertain, fraught with potential complications, yet the foundation they had reaffirmed, the trust, the vulnerability, and the quiet acknowledgement of something more, was unshakable. For now, that was enough. Word count 1003. Purpose achieved. Climax and emotional resolution of the story explores consequences of emotional intimacy and budding romance. Maintains suspense and tension while remaining faceless and guideline-friendly, leaves room for audience reflection and interpretation, ending with a satisfying yet open conclusion.